The researchers had been tracking her for 11 days. On the 12th, she stopped. Not stopped moving. Stopped going where she was going, turned, and walked 20 kilometers in the opposite direction. Away from the hunting ice. Away from the open water leads where she'd been feeding. Toward the interior of the ice shelf where there was nothing. She stood at the edge of an interior fracture line for 7 hours. Motionless. Not hunting. Not sleeping. Standing. When the glaciologist on the team pulled the satellite data that evening, she went quiet for a long time before she said anything. 41 hours after the bear left that spot, 300 million tons of ice shelf fell into the sea. The tracking project had been running for 2 years. 3 female polar bears fitted with GPS satellite collars in the southern Beaufort Sea. A collaborative study between a wildlife biology team and a glaciology group, the 2 disciplines sharing logistics and field time in one of the most remote research environments on Earth. The bear researchers called her F7. 7 years old, estimated. A healthy adult female, experienced hunter, moving through her range with the efficiency of an animal that had been reading this landscape since birth. Dr. Annika Sorensen had been leading the wildlife component of the project for 14 months. She knew F7's patterns from 11 days of close tracking and from the archive of previous collar data. F7 moved along pressure ridges and the edges of Polynius, the areas of open water that formed and closed with the Arctic winds. She hunted ringed seals. She rested on flat, stable ice away from active leads. She did not go to the interior of the shelf. The shelf's interior was featureless. No open water, no prey, no reason for a hunting bear to be there. In the 17 months of data before this, F7 had never moved more than 2 kilometers from the hunting zone without a clear directional purpose. On day 12, she walked directly away from the hunting ice. Annika was in the field camp when the morning GPS upload arrived. She looked at the track on her screen and read it 3 times. Then she radioed Dr. Mara Lindqvist, the glaciologist. F7 went inland. 20 kilometers. Overnight. Show me the coordinates. Annika read them. There was a pause on the radio. Then, I need to check something. Mara was at the base camp, 12 kilometers away by snowmobile. She had been working with the ice shelf's internal fracture data, the system of cracks and stress lines that ran through the shelf's body below and sometimes through its surface. The data came from a combination of satellite radar, airborne laser altimetry, and ground-penetrating radar surveys done the previous season. She found F7's GPS position on the fracture map. The bear was standing at the southern end of a major stress fracture, a crack that had been developing over the previous 3 years, widening by an average of 60 centimeters per year. The section of shelf to the north of the fracture had been flagged in their last risk assessment as a high-probability calving candidate. Not imminent, the assessment said 12 to 36 months. But flagged. She called Annika back. Where exactly is she standing? Annika gave the coordinates again. She's at the fracture, Mara said. They didn't speak for a moment. The radio static filled the silence. Is she moving? Mara asked. Annika checked the live tracker. No. She's been stationary for 4 hours. Mara pulled on her outer gear and got on the snowmobile. She needed to see this for herself. The ice shelf fracture was visible from the surface, not as a dramatic crack, but as a slight depression in the snow, a line where the shelf surface had subsided fractionally as the underlying structure separated. A feature that the trained eye could read and that everything else on the shelf moved past without registering. Mara arrived at the observation point, a kilometer back from F7's position, close enough for good optics, far enough to avoid disturbing the bear, at 2 in the afternoon. F7 was standing at the fracture line, her body parallel to it, her head down. Not the posture of a sleeping bear, not the posture of a resting bear. The posture of an animal attending to something. Mara set up her spotting scope and watched. The bear's posture, to a glaciologist, was not obviously meaningful. But what Mara understood from her years of working on sea ice was that polar bears experience the ice the way she experienced data, through the specific, detailed perception of something that had been their entire environment. The sound of it, the feel of it, the vibration it carried. The fracture Mara had been monitoring was not silent. All ice under stress was not silent. The microfracturing of crystal structures, the pressure waves of internal movement, these were not audible to humans at any useful distance. But they moved through the ice as physical vibration. And a large animal with 4 feet on the surface of that ice was not just hearing the world around it. It was feeling it. F7 stood on the fracture for 7 hours. She left before dark, turned, walked directly back toward the hunting zone, and resumed her normal pattern by the following morning. In the 24 hours after she left, she caught a ringed seal at a lead edge. Normal behavior. The satellite data was uploaded at the end of the day. Mara was reviewing the displacement measurements for the fracture zone, routine monitoring, done every 48 hours when she saw it. The fracture had moved. Not dramatically. 6 centimeters of additional lateral separation since the previous measurement. A normal change over 48 hours would be 2 centimeters or less. She ran the calculation again. The rate of separation had tripled in the preceding 24-hour window. She sent the data to the structural glaciology team at her home institution. The reply came back within 2 hours. The fracture was in active acceleration. Their models, updated with the new measurement, had revised the calving timeline from 12 to 36 months to days. She read that word, days, and sat at her camp desk for a moment. She thought about F7, standing at the fracture line with her head down and her feet on the ice, 7 hours ago. She called Annika. 41 hours later, at 3:22 a.m. on a Wednesday, the seismic sensors the team had deployed along the shelf perimeter registered an event. Mara was awake for it. She had been checking instruments every 2 hours. She went outside into the pale Arctic morning and looked north. The calving was audible before it was visible. A deep, concussive sound, the kind that traveled through the ice itself as much as the air. Then the light changed at the northern edge of the shelf, the flat white horizon interrupted by something enormous falling into the sea. 310 million tons of ice shelf. Gone in under 4 minutes. The open water where it had been was dark and perfectly still by morning. Mara Lindqvist's field report included a section on the bear's behavior that was unusual for a glaciology paper. Her institution's communications department flagged it as potentially newsworthy. She declined the interviews and kept the language precise. On the day preceding the accelerated fracture event, GPS collar data for subject F7 shows sustained stationary positioning at the primary fracture site for approximately 7 hours. This is inconsistent with the subject's established behavioral patterns in the preceding 11 days and in 17 months of prior tracking data. Whether the subject's presence at the fracture site reflects detection of the fracture's kinetic state through vibration, sound transmission through ice, infrasound, or some combination of these, cannot be determined from existing data. It is documented. She spent a long time on that last sentence. It is documented. She meant. She had seen it, she had the data, she was not going to speculate beyond what the data supported. She was a scientist. The data was what it was. In her personal journal, she wrote differently. F7 stood on that crack for 7 hours while we were measuring a 3-year trend and projecting it forward 12 months. She was there because the ice was telling her something we couldn't yet measure. She left when she'd heard enough or felt enough or known enough. She went back to hunting seals. We watched a mountain of ice fall into the ocean. I keep thinking about what she was feeling through her feet. The calving event was logged and processed. The shelf's new edge was mapped. The research project continued for another season. F7 was tracked for 2 more years after the event. Her range shifted as all the bear's ranges shifted, following the ice. She remained a successful hunter through each season of data. Her GPS track, across 4 years of monitoring, showed an animal navigating a changing landscape with the precision of something that had been calibrated to it over a lifetime, and that recalibrated continuously as the landscape changed. Polar bears have lived on Arctic sea ice for hundreds of thousands of years. Ice that formed and cracked and calved and refroze. Ice that was reliable in some seasons and unstable in others. An animal that could not read the difference between stable ice and failing ice, could not feel through its feet what was happening below the surface, was an animal that did not survive long enough to become an ancestor. What F7 knew about that fracture, she knew the way all her kind knew the ice. Not abstractly, not from a model, not from data uploaded every 48 hours. From the direct, physical contact of 4 large feet on a surface that spoke to her in a language older than any instrument Mara had brought to the Arctic. The ice shelf is smaller now. It calves more frequently than it did when Mara first came here. The rate of change has outpaced the models more than once. The bears recalibrate. They move their ranges. They find new ice, or they find less ice, or they find no ice. They keep reading what's there. Somewhere out on the Beaufort Sea, F7 is still walking, still listening, still knowing things through her feet that we have not yet learned to measure.